Enemy as an unreasonable, unrelenting threat to the world. Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, has declared repeatedly that Iran will not attack or threaten any country. He has also issued a fatwa against production, stockpiling, and use of nuclear weapons, and banned nuclear weapons as sacrilegious. Iran has been a consistent supporter of the NPT and called for a nuclear weapons-free Middle East. Under U.S. pressure, the UN Security Council ordered Iran to stop enriching uranium and has imposed sanctions without justification. The International Atomic Energy Agency, or the IAEA, is in charge of monitoring the nuclear programs of all countries. The IAEA is supposed to work with countries to resolve issues and report them to the UN Security Council if they cannot be assured that a country has not diverted nuclear material for non-peaceful use. If that happens, the Security Council can then decide to impose sanctions or use force. In the case of Iran, there is no evidence that Iran is building or even intends to build nuclear weapons. The IAEA director, Dr. El-Baradei, has consistently confirmed that there has been no diversion of safeguarded nuclear materials in Iran.
I have been concerned by hearing a lot of talks about use of force. I think that's, in my view, very counterproductive. What we have seen on the ground in Iran that are issues that need to be clarified. I said again, Iran needs to build confidence through suspending its enrichment-related activities. But that has been said. I have repeated that we have not seen any undeclared facilities operating in Iran. We have seen any concrete evidence that the Iran program is being weaponized. We have not received any information to that effect. So I haven't heard any other information to the contrary. So while we're still concerned about the nature of the Iranian program, we should not, I do not believe at this stage that we are facing clear and present danger that require that we go beyond diplomacy.
He has also repeatedly urged skeptics in Western capitals to help the IAEA by sharing any possible proof in their possession of suspicious nuclear activity in Iran. But the only proof offered has been proven false. The U.S. instead relies on coercion to get the UN and international agencies to serve the U.S. agenda.
The United States makes the UN work when it wants it to work. And that is exactly the way it should be, because the only question for the United States is what's in our national interest. And if you don't like that, I'm sorry, but that is the fact.
India was told there would be no U.S.-India nuclear deal if they did not vote against Iran at the IAEA. Mistrust of Iran is based on the fact that Iran developed reactors in secret for 18 years. The U.S. offers this as evidence that Iran has something to hide, but the undeclared work was justified given the U.S. campaign to undermine any effort to develop out in the open. Iran learned that their contracts with countries like Germany and China would be cancelled under U.S. pressure. Thus, Washington systematically violated, with impunity, Article 4 of the NPT, which allows signatories of the fullest possible exchange of equipment, materials, and scientific technological information for the peaceful uses of nuclear energy. There are solutions to the transparency issues, such as putting all the world's nuclear energy production and distribution under international control. But since this doesn't give the U.S. control, such proposals are dismissed. We are left with escalation disguised as diplomacy, where U.S. offers to negotiate with Iran require that terms of the negotiation be conceded before the talks can even begin. Washington is not afraid of Iran becoming a nuclear threat anytime soon. Misleading the American public to believe otherwise is a pretext for war. But there are some things Washington does fear. Due to historical accident, most of the world's petroleum is in Shiite parts of the Middle East, including Shia-controlled Iraq, Shia Iran, and the Shia region of Saudi Arabia. Washington's worst nightmare is the formation of an independent, loose Shiite alliance, controlling most of the world's oil, possibly even joining the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, linked to the Asian energy security grid. U.S. economic rivals China and Russia are members, and Iran is an observer. The U.S., however, is shut out. Also, Saudis and Japanese are holding financial reserves in U.S. dollars, propping up the U.S. economy. If the energy grid expands, they may diversify, causing the value of the dollar to plummet. The economic problems for the U.S. could be huge. There are accusations that Iran is supporting terrorism.
When we're talking about questions of sponsoring terrorism, I think we have to pull back a little bit and really ask what do we mean by terrorism? If we're looking at it from the standpoint of one definition, which is armed groups targeting civilians and causing innocent people to die for whatever reason that motivates them, there are indications that indeed Iran might be providing some support to groups who would undertake those type of actions. On the other hand, many of these same groups themselves have legitimate political grievances in terms of the ongoing situation in the Middle East, in terms of the situation, for example, in Israel and Palestine, where people are deprived of their rights. So if we look historically at the issue of terrorism, it can be said in many circumstances that one person's terrorist is another person's freedom fighter. We could certainly look at the history of South Africa, for example, to see where Nelson Mandela and the members of the African National Congress were painted as terrorists, and now we recognize their contributions to freedom in their country. Compared with this issue, we also have to look at what the experience of our country has been and what we have both directly and indirectly supported, which could equally be looked at as terrorism. So we can look at the fact of the wars in Central America of the 1980s, where we backed death squads in Guatemala and El Salvador, and we backed the counter-revolution in Nicaragua, all which targeted innocent people, which propagated severe human rights abuses, including torture on many of these people. We could look also going back to Africa in terms of the United States cooperation with South Africa in suppressing the frontline regimes in Angola, Mozambique, and Guinea-Bissau, countries that at the beginning had a real chance to make real change in their countries in the post-colonial era, but because of our interest in countering Soviet power during the time of the Cold War, we backed the most ruthless mercenaries, and millions of people died. The consequences of those types of policies, which are equivalent to what the carnage wrought by terrorism, has been, for example, in Africa, countries that are awash with arms, that our country permits small arms, hundreds of thousands to flood places like Africa, where the really terrible wars in places like Sierra Leone and other countries in West Africa flourish. So again, we really have to look at the responsibility going across many different countries in this case, and in particular, since we're here in the United States, to look at the prime responsibility of our country being the strongest superpower in the world is basically dictating the course of action for much of the way the rest of the world runs.
Add this to the double hypocrisy of the U.S., one for complaining about Iran interfering in Iraq, and two for U.S. sponsorship of terrorism in Iran. The U.S. Congress authorized tens of millions to promote democracy in Iran, which has meant using clandestine operations to stir up ethnic conflicts, funding and arming military groups and ethnic separatists to cause havoc and destabilization, with hopes that it will instigate a revolt. These are the same accusations being made against Iran. The new direction in U.S. policy is yet another imperialist tradition of divide and rule by funding and inciting region-wide sectarian conflict between Sunni and Shia.